of Canadian Homes. If a little bit later on in the meeting here, if Joanne could share the website for the bootmakers in the chat so people can subscribe if they're so interested. So it is very much appreciated. Again, we ask all of our attendees to please mute themselves. As I mentioned, I had skipped over some items in the agenda, so I apologize for the presenters. Is our special guest, who I was supposed to call on first, still with us? If you are, can you please unmute and turn your camera on? So, with my deepest apologies. This is called Greg stalling for time right now. So we my apologies. We have a very special guest joining us today. Mr. Holmes, are you there?
I am indeed. I will attempt to make myself visible.
Yeah, Greg's not having a good day here, so let's try that again. Mr. Holmes, we are honored that you can join us today.
I am honored that you take an interest in me.
So how do you, first of all, congratulations on your recent birthday.
Well, thank you very much.
So, do you have any rebuttal to the toast that Monica Schmidt offered in your honor?
Rebuttal? I never rebut a toast in my honor. The only point I would like to make is that so many toasts are made in my honor that many of those of you who call yourself Sherlockians often end up at the end of the day unable to think yourself out of the proverbial paper bag. Something that is not something I condone.
So, what have you been doing lately? I'm just curious. What have you been involved with?
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
What have you been doing? What have you been keeping yourself busy with these days?
Well, there are certain things that are going on in this country at this time, which is why I am in the Eastern Seaboard at this moment. It is difficult to explain exactly without compromising certain other individuals. So consequently, I cannot go into any great detail, but it has been asked that I be available, and I may be involved in some consultation over the next few days.
Oh, interesting. It's a pleasure to hear that you're still so active here. Now, your sitting room looks a little different than I recall from what Dr. Watson has described it.
What is different?
Your sitting room looks different than it has in the past, according to Dr. Watson's description.
I am sitting right now in a room made available to me. Shall we say it is an undisclosed location offered to me by one of your own number.
Okay, fantastic.
It is a very pleasant place with some familiar items.
So, it's very purple. And we imagine your friend is a fan of the Baltimore Ravens here, so we look forward to that. What was it like all those years on 221B Baker Street?
Most of the time was actually quite boring. It was my effort consequently to relieve the ennui by taking on a variety of cases, sometimes and leaving the flat, of course. But back at the flat, I would say that even Watson said he preferred the peace and quiet of 221B. So shall we say that it was for the most part peaceful there, except for those occasions when, say, we had to subdue a ruffian.
Mm-hmm. Have you been in touch with Dr. Watson recently?
Oh, yes, and he passes on his condolences to you all that he could not be there. I know that he would have loved to have joined you, but he shares my concern for your health. So please keep the alcohol consumption to a minimum.
We will take that under advisement, sir. So, how do you feel about some of the portrayals that have been done of you recently by some of the actors? Such as Mr. Comeback or Mr. Downey, for instance.
Shall we run down all of them one by one? I think there are some 1,300.
You can pick and choose.
Pick and choose. Well, I would venture to say that Mr. Brett has won a few plaudits, except for his, shall we say, his manner occasionally, jerking about. Very amusing to me. Let's see. Mr. Arthur Watner, I think, deserves some credit for having managed to look exactly like a Sidney Paget drawing. Those are the only two who come to mind.
Oh, okay. And do you have a favorite actor who has portrayed Dr. Watson by any chance?
Well, very interesting question. The gentleman who served with Mr. Brett, both of them, Mr. Burke and Mr. Hardwick, I think deserved some praise. I was most amused during the 40s to watch the performance by Mr. Bruce. I used to chide Watson about Mr. Bruce's performance, and I don't remember you saying quite those words to me on those occasions.
Interesting. Can we expect to see any of your more recent adventures being written up?
My more recent adventures?
Yes, sir.
We will have to deal with, shall we say, your intelligence organizations here. I am told that some of my activities of the last few weeks may never see the light of day. I'm sorry to say.
What would you consider to be your greatest adventure?
Well, it has been alluded to. Watson referred to it as the matter of the giant rat of Sumatra. There's so much that you can deduce from that title alone. Oh, heavens, it was, at the time, a tale that the world was not prepared for, and it's certainly unprepared for now. Consider the notion of what power, what might be given to a person who had the ability to create biological organisms that had the capacity to reach tremendous size. Leave it to the imagination and you can see that it was a tale that needed to be suppressed at all costs. And I would venture to say still should be suppressed. So I will stay mum on this occasion as well.
Probably a wise choice.
Yes.
Last week at the dinner that the Baker Street Irregular held in your honor, most sang your praises. Mrs. Hudson, on the other hand, offered somewhat of a rebuttal. What do you have anything to say to her comments?
I had heard of them. Would you refresh my memory? I wish to hear it.
Well, Mrs. Hudson was saying, she was complaining that you put bullet holes in her walls and those type things. Are those items true?
Oh, that's quite accurate, and Watson reported it. In my own defense, I would say that I paid her a princely rental payment, and consequently, when I was absent, even then, we kept the payments going so that she would maintain the flat. She had very little to complain of, I think.
Oh, Mr. Holmes.
Oh, heavens.
A princely sum, you say?
Indeed.
For you who don't know me, I'm Helga Hudson. You know me as Mrs. Hudson. I was the long-suffering landlady of Mr. Holmes and Mr. Watson. And his princely sum that was reported in one of Doctor's story fairy tales was barely enough to pay for the gas bill. I am always at straits trying to make things do here at Baker Street. To put it bluntly, Mr. Holmes was pretty much a cheap bastard. What do you have to say to that, Mr. Holmes?
Well, my parents were indeed wedded to each other, so that is a statement in fact. As opposed to being cheap, well, that is a matter of subjective opinion. And certainly, perhaps we can come to some compensation. After all, I do serve you the royal jelly in those shipments that has kept you alive all these years. Don't you think that is something?
Well, take a look at me. Do you think it's done any good? I don't think so. And the other thing that since we've opened up the door, so to speak, about my dealings with you, let's talk about your violin playing in the middle of the night, squeaking away, keeping me awake. And Watson, of course, he always makes good of you. He says you were quite a virtuoso on the violin. Well, in my opinion, you should just shove the thing up your ass. I see that you're speechless, Mr. Holmes.
Was contemplating a rebuttal. I have a tale to tell to the others about Mrs. Hudson, and I think it's complimentary. To some extent, one should point out a little bit of a mystery as to why so many Scotland Yarders were on hand that night during the matter of capturing Colonel Moran, an adventure that, of course, has been set down as the adventure of the empty house. The reason that there were so many of the force present was because I had rather offhandedly and perhaps a little too casually said to Inspector Lestrade that all men should keep an eye out on my window over Baker Street and wait and watch until Mrs. Hudson was done adjusting her bust.
Oh, Mr. Holmes, you should be ashamed of yourself, making your poor, long-suffering landlady a brunt of such a crude joke. You are certainly the world's first revolting detective.
I will have Watson get in touch with you and perhaps write you shall we say, a letter of recommendation to others for your fine services. Cheers.
Cheers. Now you've driven me to the bottle, as you see. Before you moved in here, Mr. Holmes, I had quite a good business going for me. I had many Scotland Yarders drop by, and they left with empty pockets but a smile on their face. As you can read between the lines what I'm talking about. But right now, I am strapped for funds, but that sweetheart, Greg Ruby, has told me how I might be able to help myself. It's something called GoFundMe. That's a little different than what I did before. It was Go something else me, but I think maybe I will take advantage of that of Mr. Holmes or Mr. Ruby's suggestion. God bless you, Mr. Ruby. And toodaloo.
Okay, now.
A pleasure to chat with you once again. A somewhat predictable occurrence, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Thank you, Mrs. Hudson.
My pleasure.
Farewell to you all, and many thanks again for your honorifics on this occasion.
And